They told her Erebus 9 was a dead-end post. No command track. No warfront. Just a lonely rock on the edge of a cold sector with a skeleton crew and a half-grown hydra struggling to keep breath in lungs and roots in dirt. It was the kind of place they sent ghosts, people too valuable to discard outright, but too inconvenient to leave in the light. A punishment wrapped in protocol. And that suited Captain Elira Voss just fine. The Erebus colony had been built atop the remains of an old mining station, abandoned after a short-lived nickel rush dried up in the early 2200s. When the agricultural initiative came in 60 years later, they repurposed the crumbling tunnels as water reservoirs and buried power conduits. With time, modular habitation domes sprouted across the cracked shale flats, forming a quiet outpost on the fringes of settled space, 3 weeks by slipstream from Earth, 8 days from the nearest Navy outpost. Remote. Obscure. Unimportant. So when the stars blinked, Elira noticed. It happened during her midnight perimeter check. She stood alone on the catwalk of Outpost 3, boots planted on creaking alloy, one hand resting on the rail, the other holding a cigarette halfway to her lips. It was cold. The kind of cold that crept under armor seals and reminded you that Erebus 9 had once tried very hard to be dead and resented being coaxed back into life. Above her, the night sky was clear, too clear. Erebus had no moon, just a curtain of stars so sharp they looked etched into black glass. She knew those constellations, knew the drift, the tilt. She could plot every major NAV route by eye. So when the whole sky flickered, just once, she didn't mistake it for static or vertigo. The stars winked out. All of them. For a fraction of a second, the universe simply vanished. She lowered the cigarette, narrowed her eyes. Corbin, she murmured into her collar mic, confirm you saw that. A burst of static. Then the half-drowsy voice of her comms tech crackled back. Yeah, got a hiccup in the sky feed. Maybe solar interference? Elira's voice was flat. That wasn't solar. She stood very still. The air had gone motionless. Not just calm silent. No wind through the outer fences. No soft hum from the substation. No distant whine of the atmospheric scrubbers. Even the static crackle of her radio cut out for a beat, like the planet itself held its breath. A subsonic tremor whispered up through the catwalk, faint enough to be imagined, but real enough to set her teeth on edge. Something ancient. Deep. Bring up the satellite feeds, she said. Full spectrum. Now. The control center at Erebus 9 was a squat building tucked into the side of a shallow ravine. Reinforced ferrocrete walls, half-buried conduits, and retractable solar panels that barely kept up with power demands. Most of the command staff were off-duty, half asleep in their bunks or drugged on rotation stems. Corbin sat at the comms terminal in an old blue flight jacket, sleeves pushed up, chewing the same piece of gum he'd had since noon. His foot tapped nonstop under the desk, a nervous tick he refused to acknowledge. He looked up at her as she entered, eyes wide. Lost contact with Orbsat 3, 4, and 6. Just dropped off. No debris signature. No decay alerts. Show me the feed. The projection flared up on the main screen. A top-down orbital view, patchy with static, showed the Erebus colony as a scattered cluster of light in a sea of iron-colored rock. Outside the boundary? Total black. Not night. Not shadow. Absence. Then something moved. At first, it looked like a smear, a distortion, like oil on water. But it wasn't in the lens. It flowed across the landscape, swallowing thermal signatures and bouncing no LiDAR. No radar pings returned from it. The software couldn't even resolve a shape. The smear pulsed, and for a moment, just a frame, it rippled. Not metal. Not ship. Something else. Too smooth. Too fluid. It made no sound, but Elira could feel it in her bones, like a pressure drop before a storm. Give me atmospheric drones, Elira barked. Every model we've got. Corbin hesitated. Cap, that thing, it's jamming passive systems. We're flying blind. Then we fly deaf and dumb. I don't care. Eyes in the air. Full colony lockdown. On it. Sirens began to howl across the station. A deep, oscillating wail that hadn't been used since a methane rupture 4 years ago. Metal shutters began to slam down over windows. Emergency lights turned the sky an angry red. Lieutenant Nero met her in the main tactical pit, still zipping up her vest, eyes bloodshot from half-sleep. She was smaller than most officers, with sharp eyes and a habit of twirling a braided bracelet on her wrist when nervous, a keepsake from her wife on Vega 7. What the hell is that thing? She asked. We don't know, Elira said. It doesn't ping as a ship. No drive plume. No radiometric signature. It's not using gravity anchors, but it's moving like it knows exactly where we are. Nera glanced at the screen, watching another drone blink off the map. EMP. No, Elira said. Too precise. EMP would fry broad systems. This thing's cutting eyes first. Strategic blinding. The thought made Nera's face go tight. Who would do that? Pirates don't have that kind of tech. The Commonwealth? No, Elira repeated, slower this time. This isn't human. Nera blinked. How can you be sure? Because she'd read the files. The ones she wasn't supposed to see. After Mars. After Dion. After Vega 7. The colonies that didn't fall. The ones that disappeared. Where the last log entries weren't Mayday signals, but silence. Places that went dark, with no debris, no signs of battle, no distress calls. Erased. Archived under non-specific failures. But not forgotten. Elira had pieced it together in fragments. One blurry sat image. One stray log. A survivor found floating catatonic in a dead skiff. And now the picture was too clear. Erebus 9 wasn't a backwater. It wasn't forgotten. It was bait. Send a priority burst to Earth, Elira ordered. High Command encryption. Erebus 9 is compromised. Request fleet detachment. Priority Alpha. Corbin looked up slowly from his station. Ma'am, if they know what this is, they might not answer. She stared at him, long and hard, then gave a slow, bitter nod. I know. Because if Earth did answer, it meant Erebus 9 still had value. If not, they were already dead. The first impact hit 2 hours later. It didn't come from orbit. No drop pod. No explosion. Just a ripple of motion across the scrublands as the thing reached the edge of the colony grid and passed straight through the perimeter. Motion sensors failed to register. Auto turrets didn't fire. Every camera aimed at it began bleeding static until nothing could be seen. Then the power grid began to bleed. One block at a time, lights began to fail. Not with sparks or overloads, just off. Swallowed. As if light refused to exist near it. Elira stood in the command center, watching her world die piece by piece. She had 47 crew. 37 civilians. Maybe enough ammo to hold out for 20 minutes in a ground assault. But this wasn't an assault. It was a study. And they were the specimen. Her last order before the feed went completely dark was simple. Arm everyone. Evac the civvies underground. Then meet me at base 6. We're going to make them bleed for every goddamn meter. Because if this was the end of Erebus 9, she'd make it legendary. And if Earth had made them a sacrifice? Then it was time someone told the galaxy the truth. Outside, beneath a sky filled with dead stars, the soil trembled. Something was coming up from below. And it remembered what humans had done last time. They lost the southern dome before dawn. No breach. No explosion. Just a flicker in the command center's power grid, a surge of static across the wall screens, and then Dome 6 went dark. All lights, all heat signatures, all signals. Gone. The auto systems registered it as a full systems failure. But Elira knew better. Something was inside. She stood with Nero on the upper gantry of command, watching the hollowed-out dome on thermal, nothing but a blue void now. 32 colonists had taken shelter in that section. Families. Engineers. A few kids. The software still pinged the dome's environmental controls as intact. The structure itself hadn't collapsed. It had been emptied. They were here 10 minutes ago, Nera whispered. I had them on the evac queue. Scheduled for Tunnel 2. Elira's eyes didn't leave the screen. Nothing moves that fast without leaving something behind. Then where the hell are the bodies? The silence dragged. Outside, the storm shutters moaned against a rising wind. But there was no storm in the forecast. Nera's knuckles were white around the railing. Cap, we've got 34 people left. We lose another dome, and we're done. Elira turned to Corbin. Any response from Earth? He shook his head, gum long forgotten. Burst went out clean. Triple ping. We got nothing back. No receipt, no bounce back. Just silence. She didn't curse. Didn't react. But her jaw flexed tight. Nera caught it. That barely restrained fury beneath cold resolve. They knew, Nera said quietly. Elira nodded. They knew. She could still remember the debriefings. The black folders. The admiral who stared too long at the colony assignment list before stamping her name in red. Elira had thought it was a punishment. Now, she wasn't so sure. Maybe they needed someone who wouldn't blink when the blood started. She had seen this before on Dion. A listening post turned ghost town. No war. No survivors. Just resonant scars burned into the rock and whispers in the deep. The reports had vanished. But she remembered every damn face. At 0430, the signal came. It burst through every screen on the station simultaneously, no encryption, no protocol. Not sound, not image. A frequency. 16.7 megahertz. It played like static, but buried inside the noise was something that wasn't meant to be heard. It was meant to touch. The sound bypassed ears. It crawled along bone. A raw, primal vibration that scraped behind the eyes. One of the junior techs vomited and collapsed. Another began to weep. Corbin staggered back from the console, clutching at his temples. Elira felt it in her molars, a grinding hum, like something ancient was tuning the planet around them. She forced herself to endure. 30 seconds. The noise spiraled into harmonics that didn't follow physics. It wasn't language. It wasn't emotion. It was notation. Her nose bled. Circuits burst in the ceiling tiles. The east corridor power grid failed in a shower of sparks. Then silence. She exhaled, cleared the blood from her lip, turned to Corbin. Record that. Every frame. Feed it through every protocol. Brute force if you have to. Corbin, pale and trembling, wiped sweat from his neck. That wasn't a signal, Cap. That was a howl. No, Elira said. A howl is instinct. This was a scan. Tunnel 2 ran deep. 50 meters beneath the surface, it had once been a loading shaft for her carts, later retrofitted with reinforced alloys, quake-baffling smart stone, and flexible seals. Built for tremors. Not for the warping of space. It was humid. Metal sweated with condensation. The air had that close, recycled taste. Generator hum pulsed through the floor, irregular now, like a heartbeat with arrhythmia. The remaining civilians huddled in the makeshift shelter. Blankets. Cots. Stale water. 17 colonists, 19 crew. Some were wounded. Some too quiet. One child stared at the stone wall and whispered, "It's listening through the cracks." No one corrected her. Elira passed armed guards posted at the entrances. They held scatterguns, slug throwers, antique weapons humanity had outgrown. But the coil rifles had failed. Plasma emitters melted in their holsters. Only combustion worked now. Old tech. Dirty tech. Human tech. It still worked. She entered the lower control alcove, flicked on the backup feeds. Still no word from Dome 6. Just silence. Then a whisper through the signal logs. Her name. Not spoken. Not typed. A cluster of harmonics translated through error correction suggested phonemes that mirrored her name. Elira. She shut it off. Vibrations deepened. They came not in pulses, but in tones, as if the stone was being sung into submission. Walls flexed at odd intervals. Light fixtures dimmed when no one moved. Sometimes, air itself grew heavy, pressing down until knees buckled. Nara reported another disappearance, Lieutenant Perez. Last seen walking into the side corridor that led to the old maintenance bay. 30 seconds later, nothing. No signal. No trail. They found his rifle. Melted into the floor. It's hunting patterns, Nara said. Mapping behavior. Reaction speed. Fear states. And thresholds, Elira added. How long until we snap? At 0600, one of the sky drones pinged back. A frame. Corrupted, but readable. It showed a black spire rising from the plains where Dome 6 had once stood. Not constructed. Grown. Twisting. Coiled like a root system reaching upward into air. No visible seams. The base pulsed faintly. Figures moved at its base. Not bipeds. Not really. They shimmered. Elongated. Limbs too thin to support their mass. Yet they moved with perfect balance. Their heads cocked like birds, but without rhythm. And their eyes. Rows of them. Spiraling back across the head. None blinked. None focused. All saw. Corbin adjusted the feed. Enhanced shadows. One creature's limb bent backward to step over a rock without breaking stride. Nara whispered, "That's not a scout. That's a sentinel." Elira nodded. And the tower? It's not transmitting, Corbin said. It's recording. Filtering. Listening. He scrubbed the audio feed. Underneath the static. Patterns. Ping. Silence. Ping. Ping. Long pause. Ping. Corbin frowned. That's not radar. It's not echolocation. It's measuring resonance. Not just the colony. The people. Our rhythms. Our speech. Our biology. Elira leaned over his shoulder. They're not invading, she said, voice low. They're cataloging. The silence held for a long moment. Then Nara spoke. Then why erase the dome? Elira turned. Because it reached capacity. That's not destruction. That's data collection. She moved to the wall console. opened a sealed engineering schematic from the original build-out. A red zone corridor ran beneath Tunnel 2, labeled Classified, Earth Central Restricted. She looked at Corbin. Get a torch. We're opening it. Why? Because that's not a storage wing. That's a listening post. And it was here before the colony. She stared at the humming floor. Earth didn't build Erebus 9 to survive. She whispered. They built it to hear what's beneath. The panel wasn't meant to be found. No biometric reader. No key slot. Just a smooth wall of alloy stone with a maintenance stamp that hadn't been used in over 100 years. The corridor was barely lit, hidden behind a collapsed junction box and a disused ventilation grate. It had taken Corbin almost 30 minutes to rewire a torch compatible with the ancient casing. When the first arc of heat touched the seam, the metal hissed and spit. A line of orange glow spread slowly through the alloy as the torch sliced deep into the hidden frame. The smell that followed was thick and acrid: ozone, scorched plastic, vaporized nanocoating. It lingered like burnt circuitry, stinging the eyes and clinging to the back of the throat. Behind the wall, the door was real. Cold-forged, 8 inches thick, lined with ancient insulation foam that crumbled at the edges like ash. Elira stepped forward, brushing dust away with her gloved hand. In the center of the slab, faded by time and grime, was a black triangle enclosed within a red circle. No name. No crest. Just a serial code etched beneath the symbol, EC 0093/Betavolt. They'd used that same mark on Dion. Her stomach clenched. She remembered the silence. The flicker of disappearing blips across the comms array. The hollow base with no bodies. The way Commander Hale whispered, "We shouldn't have opened it," before putting his sidearm in his mouth. "Stand back," Corbin muttered, and triggered the manual override. The door didn't hiss open. It shuddered. With a groan like something buried remembering how to breathe, the panel split vertically and slid back into the walls. A gust of cold, dead air swept past them, dry as paper. Lights flickered to life inside, not with the crisp blue-white of colony fluorescence, but a dull, pulsing green. It cast long shadows that seemed to breathe on the walls. Nera raised her rifle. "What is this place?" Elira's voice came flat. "A truth Earth was never going to tell us." The tunnel beyond sloped downward into the bedrock at a steep incline, too steep for normal foot traffic. Handholds were embedded in the walls, and their boots clanged softly on old metal grates that echoed longer than they should have. The lighting changed the deeper they went. At first, the green pulses were evenly spaced. Then they flickered in irregular intervals, as though reacting to their movements. Or their breathing. The walls began to curve inward, not tight, but unnatural. Like walking through the ribcage of something too large to bury properly. 50 meters down, the tunnel leveled out. The architecture changed. Gone were the industrial alloys and human geometries. The corridor opened into a chamber that defied their maps, a space no schematic listed. The walls were smooth and seamless, a matte gray material that felt neither metal nor stone. There were no joints, no welds, no marks of construction. It hadn't been built. It had been grown. They passed through a narrow threshold into the central chamber. The ceiling arched overhead like a cathedral. Dozens of small, recessed alcoves lined the walls, each filled with glimmering filaments that shifted color and shape when observed. In the center stood a dais, more like a pedestal of bone or petrified wood. Upon it hovered a console, 5 distinct rings of glyphs spinning in slow counter-rotation. The symbols hurt to look at. Not in the physical sense, there was no pain. But something in their eyes rejected the shapes. Glyphs changed when glanced at directly. No two people saw the same rotation. Corbin reached out once, and the symbols bled into spiraling fractals that made him stagger back, muttering curses. Nera kept her rifle raised. "Cap," she whispered. "What is this?" Elira stepped forward, drawn by instinct more than reason. Her footsteps echoed with strange delay. Each step landed a half-second behind the motion. "It's not a listening post," she said. "But it's active," Corbin added. "It's been drawing power since before we cracked the vault. This thing's been running." The console responded to her approach. The glyphs pulsed and slowed. A low hum filled the air, subsonic and resonant. The floor beneath them trembled, like the beginning of a quake. But the station's sensors didn't register any seismic activity. The tunnel behind them sealed. No hiss. No mechanical movement. The doorway simply folded shut. Seamless. As if it had never existed. Corbin spun, panic rising. "What the hell?" "It's automated," Elira said. She wasn't surprised. Nera backed toward her, rifle steady. "Cap, this place is alive. We shouldn't be here." Elira reached the console. The symbols froze. One by one, they reshaped into cleaner forms, angles, coordinates, pulse markers. A single glyph, circular and lined with radial marks, pulsed brighter than the others. A map, not of Erebus. Beneath Erebus, it showed layers of stone, fault lines, and then, deeper still, a cavity. A chamber, kilometers wide. Energy blooming outward like a ripple in water. The signal, 16.7 megahertz. That's not a chamber, Corbin said. It's a well. A reservoir. Of what? Nero asked. Elira stared at it. Memory. Images surged through the room. Holograms or dreams. Impossible to tell. Machines folding into themselves. Cities blooming out of dust in seconds. Towering shapes made of gravity and light, walking across dead planets. Frequencies shaping language. Time. Will. She saw human forms. Not ours. Not truly. Pale and tall and flickering at the edges. A war. Not one. Not lost. Abandoned. And a translator. This room. This vault. Designed to interface between what slept below and whatever was left of the galaxy above. She touched the console. Pain flared through her skull. White. Pressure. Geometry. Names with no language. A screen drawn across space and folded into time. Her father's voice. Her commander's death. Her own memories twisted into something alien. She collapsed. Nera caught her arm. Cap. Elira gasped, blinking back vertigo. Her voice was hoarse. This wasn't made by us. Earth found it. They found this whole complex buried in the crust. They didn't build Erebus to terraform a rock. Corbin was pale. Then what? Elira's eyes locked on the glyph now pulsing at the center of the console. They built the colony to mask the translator. To keep it quiet. To suppress the frequency. Why? Nero asked. Because they were afraid of what might answer. The glyph pulsed once. The chamber rumbled. A deep, resonant tone filled the air, not sound. Vibration. Language. It wasn't speaking to them. It was announcing something. Above them, alarms began to scream through the tunnel system. A cascade of sensor failures. Atmospheric pressure dropping. Lights across the colony blinking out, one sector at a time. And a new signal rising. Elira's wrist pad lit up, an unauthorized transmission broadcast from beneath the colony. Not from the translator. From below it. She tapped into the signal. Coordinates. A location at the colony's edge where the scrublands cracked and blackstone formed jagged ridges. A surface rupture. New. Bleeding heat. The glyph shifted again. A second shape now rotated beside the map. A new figure. Symmetrical. Circular. Expanding. Corbin stared at it, horrified. That's not just a beacon. Nera's voice was tight. It's a call. A call to what? Elira's lips thinned. To whatever survived. Nera turned to her. What do we do? Elira's voice was cold. Focused. The old soldier awake again. We go topside. We find out what's answering. She looked back at the glyphs. And if it's still listening? She chambered around into her shotgun with a heavy click. Then we remind it what happens when humanity gets cornered. The elevator shaft had died hours ago, so they climbed. Corbin cursed every rung, boots slipping on sweat-slick metal as the emergency ladder groaned beneath them. The walls trembled with increasing rhythm, soft at first, like distant thunder rolling underfoot, then sharper, more defined. Dust flaked down from forgotten pipes and old welds, sticking to sweat-drenched skin. The entire shaft felt like a throat being cleared, as if the planet itself were preparing to speak. Above them, the colony was dying. One light at a time. Elira climbed first, shotgun slung across her back, flashlight taped to her forearm. Her breath was measured, mechanical. No wasted motion. She'd breached towers under fire, cleared corridors thick with gas and bodies. But this felt different. Colder. Personal. Nera followed close behind, every movement sharp. Focused. Her fingers tapped against her weapon's frame, a nervous tell she'd had since Elira met her on Vega 7. Corbin brought up the rear, grumbling with each meter of ascent, but not hesitating. They emerged 20 minutes later into a world remade. Elira pushed open the emergency hatch with her shoulder, and heat slammed into her like a solid wall. Not wind. Wait. The air was thick, sulfur-scented, and buzzing with energy. Not the hum of machinery, but something older. The atmospheric change was immediate. Her skin prickled with rising static. Her ears popped. The sky had turned red. Not sunset red. Not Martian dusk. but a rotting crimson smeared across the heavens like spilled wine left to decay. Clouds twisted in vertical shears, dragging across the horizon like ribbons of molten glass. Wind slithered instead of howling. It didn't blow. It sifted like it was searching. Atmospheric compositions off the charts, Nara muttered, checking her reader. CO2 spike. Oxygen flux. Trace isotopes I don't recognize. The air's trying to change us. Corbin clambered out of the hatch last and dropped to one knee, coughing violently. It's like breathing microwaves. Elira didn't answer. Her gaze was locked eastward, toward the edge of the colony grid, toward the crack. What had been a minor fault line that morning, a geological hiccup, was now a yawning gash in the crust. Half a kilometer long, at least 30 meters wide, and still growing. The edges steamed, not with heat, but with exhaust, the kind that spoke of venting, not from pressure, but from transition, as though something was emerging and the world above was sloughing off in response. They walked toward it in silence. It took 10 minutes to cross the desolation that had once been the colony's eastern perimeter. The farms were gone, uprooted, shredded, turned inside out. Habdome 9 lay caved in, with cracks webbing across its transparent alloy. A water tank lay on its side, leaking steam instead of liquid. Power lines flickered like veins cut from something still trying to live. And at the far end of the fissure, something was rising. At first glance, the forms looked like pillars, dark, uniform slabs of material pushed up from the crust. But they weren't stone. They moved, too slowly to notice at first. But as they approached, Elira could see the subtle pulsation of their surfaces, like breath beneath tight skin. The monoliths glistened in the ambient light, covered in etchings that shifted when stared at directly. Symbols rearranged. Some seemed to match the glyphs from the translator chamber. Others were entirely new. Then one of the towers tilted. Just a fraction. Enough to catch a breeze that didn't exist. But the motion sent a deep rumble through the earth, a subsonic tremor that passed through muscle and marrow. Corbin dropped to his knees with a grunt. Nara flinched. Elira just clenched her teeth. The air shimmered, and then the sky peeled open. It didn't tear or crack. It peeled, a thin line forming along the upper atmosphere, sharp and luminous, like the seam of a surgical incision. Light bled from it, white at first, then layered with spectrum, then other. The sound came a second later. Not thunder, not wind. A chime. Beautiful, horrifying. The kind of sound that made parts of the brain flinch, not because it was loud, but because it felt too perfect, too correct. And then it came through. Not a ship, not in any traditional sense. Too large, too fluid. It unfolded through the seam like a shadow playing in 3 dimensions, reshaping itself with each movement. Liquid metal stretched over an invisible frame. Tendrils of mirrored material fluttered like banner signals, each reflecting scenes that hadn't happened yet, or had happened long ago. Elira felt it before she saw it fully. A pressure in her head. Not pain. Not presence. Observation. The being didn't land. It descended. And all around the fissure, the towers responded. One by one, they pulsed with rhythmic light, forming a lattice of awareness, a net cast over the colony. Signals crossed between them like neurons firing. Frequencies danced. And from the open wound in the earth, something else stepped forward. It was tall, at least 3 meters. Limbs too many to count in motion, too few when still. It shimmered, not with color, but with meaning, each part of it communicating before its body moved. A silhouette designed not for beauty or terror, but for clarity. It had no face, no eyes, but Elira knew it saw them. Then it did something unexpected. It stopped. Its limbs folded back, deliberately. Its posture changed, sloping down, not in submission, but in invitation. One of its hands, if it could be called that, extended toward a collapsed data terminal. It hovered there, waiting. Nara's voice cracked. Cap, that thing, what is it? Elira didn't answer immediately. She was watching its stride, the way the ground didn't resist it. How it floated not on air, but on intent. This isn't an arrival, she said softly. It's a reawakening. Corbin whimpered, rocking beside a scorched rover. My brother died on Vega 7. Just vanished. Colony blackout. Everyone said pirates. But I remember. The sky looked like this before we lost them. We're meant to see this, Elira said. That's why they built Erebus. To witness. To record. A hush fell. Not silence. Stillness. As though the world itself was holding its breath. She knelt by Corbin, steadying his shoulders. I need a signal burst. Open channel. Unencrypted. Full spectrum. He fumbled with his wrist pad. What do I say? She stood, looked at the horizon, where the sky was still bleeding light, where more forms began to shimmer into view, like memories stepping out of fog. Tell them we remember. Her voice was calm. And this isn't first contact. Nara blinked. Then what is it? Elira's grip tightened on the shotgun. It's the second round. Elira had been waiting for the countermand. Not from the sky, not from the shimmering beings now standing sentinel at the edge of the world, but from Earth, from the brass, from command, from the cold, polished silence of home. It came exactly 8 minutes after Corbin broadcast the signal. The message was tight beam. No headers. No authentication. Elira stared at the words on her wrist pad. The message pulsed once, then auto-deleted, leaving behind the ghost of its impact like radiation. Neru stood beside her, reading the residual echo of the transmission on her own pad. They're going to kill us, she said. There was no fear in her voice. Just clarity. Elira nodded. Because we saw it. Because we told someone, Elira said. We broke protocol. The worst part wasn't the order. It was the automation. There hadn't been a human voice. No face. No name. Just a buried algorithm, waiting in the silence like a loaded chamber. The moment Corbin's signal breached the threshold, an old relay range, a specific data harmonic, it had triggered the response. Earth hadn't needed to hear what they said, just that they'd said something. Neru lowered her pad. So now what? Elira didn't hesitate. Now we make sure they never get the chance to do it again. The colony had protocols for internal collapse. Not for invasion. Not for planetary breach. But for containment. It was an old Cold Age doctrine, Scenario V, total exposure. In the event of unclassified existential contact or anomalous data breach, the colony's own support grid became the weapon. Power cores overloaded. Automated drones were converted into kill switch relays. Atmos scrubbers could be turned into chemical purifiers or poison clouds. Communications retracted to tight beam only. And orbitals above were ordered to fire without confirmation. Erebus 9 had always been a trap. For something. They just hadn't expected to be inside when it snapped shut. Corbin worked fast. The central node, buried beneath admin block C, was partially fused, but he knew the grid better than most. He was the last original tech officer still breathing. The rest were gone. Taken during the first signal burst or left unrecognizable when the translation field pulsed. He crawled into the charred relay tunnel with nothing but a coil pack and a rusted toolkit, and bypassed the AI node entirely. The original firmware was still buried beneath 6 layers of override, old UN coding, back before the Navcon reformation. Ancient but stable, and brutally unfiltered. He rewired the uplink, bypassed the kill relays, and found the orbital tether's emergency line still intact. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't safe. But it worked. From there, he did what humans do best when cornered. He adapted. He began rerouting every available feed. Power from old water condensers. Signal processors from a decommissioned weather station. The comms dish atop the hydrogrid dome was cracked, but functional at 64%. It would have to do. Neru returned dragging 3 crates of old naval munitions. Slug throwers. Blast mines. 2 barrels of outdated explosive gel wrapped in peeling hazard tape. It wasn't enough to fight a fleet, but it was enough to hurt one. Found these in the old trade conflict depot, she said. Didn't think they'd ever be used. They were never meant to be, Elira replied. She didn't speak much after that. She recorded. One by one, dome to dome, she walked the scarred colony. From collapsed residential units to the shattered medbay. From the crumpled comm tower to the hydroponics garden now blackened and dead. She captured it all. The red sky. The towers. The ship hanging overhead like a forgotten god. The sentinel creature still watching. She only narrated once. This is Erebus 9. Colony Class C. Pop. 83. Earth ordered it to burn. We refused. Uploading the footage was slower than expected. The main satellite mesh had been compromised, deliberately, it seemed, with timing too clean to be coincidence. Elira had seen this before. Silent sabotage. Pre-configured redundancy wipes. Fail-safes designed not to protect the colony, but to protect Earth's plausible deniability. But they had one shot. Buried beneath Supply Dome 2 was an old beacon satellite, a relic from the early expansion era. Dumb tech, manual triggers, no auto-wipe, no navmesh dependency, but still capable of blind fire bursts through the drift relays. They hauled it to the surface, patched its dish, fed it power from a solar core rigged with a bypass shunt, and set it on a continuous loop. Every 30 seconds, it would fire the full recording package: video, audio, telemetry, atmosphere, and the transmission logs. They didn't know where it would go. Didn't need to. Someone, somewhere, would hear it. Someone had to. Behind them, a few civilians gathered. Survivors, engineers, med techs, 2 farmers with dust-blackened hands. No one spoke. No one asked for orders. They just watched Elira walk back from the beacon launch vault. And in their silence was something dangerous. Belief. That night, Elira sat alone outside the ruined perimeter fence, the shotgun resting across her knees. The air was quiet now. The wind had died. The red sky had settled into something darker, less rage, more resignation. But the towers still pulsed in sequence. And above them, the ship still hung, unmoving. The sentinel remained, watching, not threatening, just observing. Neru sat beside her after a while. Neither spoke at first. Finally, Neru asked, "Do you think it understands us?" Elira didn't answer immediately. "I think it's listening," she said. "And I think it's waiting to see who speaks for us." "You think we do?" Elira turned to her. "No. I think we just proved Earth doesn't." She remembered Europa. A civilian outpost flagged for relocation. When command ordered her to evacuate only the data cores, she'd obeyed. Left 27 behind. They'd called it an efficiency protocol. She'd called it following orders. She hadn't disobeyed then. She would now. The next morning, the sensors triggered. The orbital tether lit up. No fleet signatures, no IFFs. But Elira didn't need IFFs to know what was coming. The burn protocols had activated. Ships were en route. Black ships. No registries. No human crew. Full denial enforcement. And they were less than 30 hours out. Corbin's voice cracked over the shortwave. "They're coming in hot, Cap. No approach signal. No decimal curve. They're not landing. They're striking." Elira stood in the middle of the ruined courtyard, shotgun in hand, facing the crack in the earth. The sentinel hadn't moved. But it knew. She could feel it. And still, no hostility. No attack. No aggression. Only waiting. Corbin's voice trembled. "Then why fight?" Elira looked to the sky. "Because for the first time in 100 years," she said, "humanity made contact on our terms. Not Earth's." She turned to him. "Because survival without truth isn't living. Because sometimes the signal matters more than the sender." Neru joined her, helmet in hand. "And because mutiny?" Elira's smile was small, tired, cold. "Mutiny is how empires fall." She racked the shotgun. "Let's make sure they remember who lit the fuse." They spent the first 6 hours preparing to die. There was no hope of victory. Elira made that clear to the crew and the remaining civilians. The black ships weren't built for combat. They were built to erase. Automated, stealth-plated, radiation-hardened, and optimized for planetary sterilization protocols. No survivors. No remains. No noise. The goal was silence. But Erebus, 9 was already speaking. And Elira intended to make it scream. The colony had been partially hollowed by now. Scarred domes, ruptured tunnels, craters where corridors used to run. The once grid-like compound had become a war den. Neru and her surviving engineers reconfigured the topography into a death spiral. Overlapping kill zones, subterranean choke points, funnel alleys laced with blast mines, improvised thermobaric traps made from repurposed fuel pods. The bastards would land, sure, but they'd pay. Elira stood on the ridge above Dome 7's wreckage, watching the beacon's satellite pulse. Every 30 seconds, a sharp whine echoed into the sky, just audible if you listened hard enough. A high-pitched shriek, barely human. A scream carried on static. She made a habit of standing outside for each one. "We're still here." Each pulse was defiance. Not just a signal. A scar, reopened, every half-minute. A warning to whatever empire thought silence equaled control. Corbin spent most of his time underground, stripped to a sweat-darkened vest, wiring control nodes into the refinery's oxidizer system. The plan was suicidal and brilliant. The main vent shaft ran deep, all the way to the sealed geothermal tap they'd never finished mining. Corbin intended to turn the system into a cannon, a vertical blast shaft loaded with volatile gas. If triggered right, the eruption would be visible from orbit. Might not kill them, he said, fingers dancing over burnt-out circuits. But they'll have to notice. He spliced the detonation to Elira's biometrics. If her vitals flatlined, it would go off automatically. Neru watched him from the edge of the hatch. You trust her that much? Corbin didn't look up. She's the only one I ever trusted with the truth. Hour 4. They scavenged everything. Hydrogrid domes became kinetic weapons caches. Survey drones were modified into low-altitude EMP grenades. Solar tracking panels were stripped and sharpened into mirror blades and line-of-sight traps. The med bay, now useless, became a fallback triage station for civilians too injured to move. Only 19 civilians remained. Elira made sure they had names. Karen, the hydroponics tech. Maldo, a mechanic with burns across half his body. Visker, an elderly woman who insisted on keeping her husband's badge around her neck even though he disappeared during the third signal pulse. And Kessa, the girl. Kessa, who hadn't cried once. Neru spent hours with her. Quiet time. No orders. Just presence. It was all the child needed. When Kessa drew the towers with charcoal on the floor of the fallback shelter, no one stopped her. Her hands didn't shake. Hour 11. The first black ship entered low orbit. It didn't decloak. It simply was, one moment absent, the next a shadow blotting out half the stars. Matte black hull. No lights. No engine flare. No heat signature. Just a cold triangle of anti-existence. It moved with surgical finality. No warning. No decil. No flare of aggression. Just intent. Then fire. The first round hit what remained of Dome 9. It didn't explode. It unmade. No kinetic force. No thermals. Just erasure. The molecular structure collapsed. The dome folded inward in a blink, reduced to raw entropy, scattering to the wind. Denial weaponry. A second round hit a nearby boulder. Nothing strategic. Just a stone. Gone in an instant. A warning. They weren't guessing. They were choosing. Elira stood still as it happened. Her breath caught, but she didn't flinch. Status? She asked. Neru's voice crackled through the comms. Only 2 shots. No spread. They're calibrating. Showing us they're watching. That they can hit anything. And then, to herself, they don't know we've already spoken. The sentinel hadn't moved. Its posture was unchanged, but something behind it. The towers, the hum in the ground, the way light bent around its outline, had changed. Like it was aware now. Not just present. Civilians in the fallback dome huddled beneath reinforced plating. One looked up through a fracture in the glass. Eyes wide, watching the sky fill with black. Elira's still out there, Visker said. Someone asked if they should call her back. No, Visker replied. She's where she needs to be. Elira walked to the fissure's edge, the place where the earth had cracked and the world had begun again. She raised both arms. I won't let them erase us, she said aloud. No response, but the tower behind the sentinel pulsed in sequence. A low vibration, felt, not heard. Elira lowered her arms. Do you hear me? The ground answered. It came not as language, but as presence. A compression of memory, a wave of shared awareness. History, not a message, but an inheritance. Colors she didn't have words for. Sound without tone. Light that echoed. It was not an offer. It was not a threat. It was acknowledgement. You are not alone. Elira fell to one knee. Not from pain. From scale. She saw images, flickers, flashes of wars fought in silence, of civilizations burned and buried beneath consensus, of monuments built from time and torn down for ideology, of other species that had spoken too loudly, too soon, and paid the cost, and of one species that had survived longer than they should have. Humanity, because they refused to shut up. In that moment, she thought of the boy she left behind on Europa, hands reaching for the evac shuttle as she obeyed her orders. She remembered how Command called it an efficiency protocol. Now she called it a scar. The second black ship appeared an hour later. Then a third. Then 6. Elira stood again, jaw clenched, shotgun across her chest. The sky above them wasn't a sky anymore. It was a judgment. Each ship hung like a punctuation mark. No movement. No broadcast. Just presence. The sentinel stepped forward. Only a pace. But enough. Elira turned to it. If you're waiting for permission to act, she said, you won't get it from Earth. She thumbed her comm. Corbin. Status on the vent charge. Armed. Ready. Biometrics synced. Good. She looked back to the red sky. To the ghosts preparing to silence them again. Let them come. The first descent pod broke atmosphere at 0600. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't armored. It looked like a coffin wrapped in ablative plating. No transponder. No approach warning. It felt like a guillotine, fast, uncaring, absolute. A black line across the bleeding red sky. It landed just west of the colony perimeter, outside the blast radius but within sight of the fallback trench. Dust geysered upward in a 30-meter plume. The shockwave rolled in like a second heartbeat, low and resonant, making teeth chatter and steel hum. Elira didn't blink. She stood in the command husk with Neru and Corbin, shotgun cradled in one hand, watching the dust settle. Behind her, the beacon still pulsed, its metallic whine the only human sound on a world waiting for judgment. That's not a troop drop, Corbin said quietly. Too small. Neru was already checking her readouts. No life signs. No biosigns at all. Remote weapon? Not unless they're planning to shoot philosophy. What do you mean? She turned the screen. The object wasn't transmitting, but it was emitting. Not in radio or heat or light. Something deeper. Pressure waves that bent space-time like whispers folding through water. Words without language. Intention without syntax. Harmonic interference that didn't just vibrate, it remembered. It's broadcasting, Neru said. But not to us. To the Sentinel, Elira said. Or to whatever's listening through it. She stepped outside. The Sentinel had moved again. Closer now, within 50 meters. No aggression. Just curiosity. Its limbs shifted slowly, like antennae reading the ambient mindscape. It watched the pod too, or whatever passed for watching. No eyes, but full presence. The obelisk half buried in the soil pulsed. Once. Then again. The light was black, not darkness, but the color of absence, eating reflection. The ground around it vibrated with microscopic shifts, as if the molecules themselves were whispering. It wasn't a weapon. It was a trigger. The second pod came in steeper. Landed harder. North Ridge, near the geothermal tap. The noise shook the fallback trenches. Corbin's hands slipped off a control relay. He cursed and wiped blood from his knuckles. Elira was already moving. She reached the ridge 10 minutes later. The pod had split open on impact like a seed pod ruptured by sunlight. Inside wasn't tech, at least, not as humans knew it. Inside was a field of mirrors. Not glass. Not metal. Reflective surfaces that shimmered like oil over mercury. They shifted with motion. Showed no faces. Only reverberations of thought. Each panel pulsed with sensation. Not images. Impressions. A shout that never reached a mouth. The echo of a childhood never lived. Futures denied. Histories rewritten. Fragmented possibilities bleeding into one another. Neru reached the ridge and saw them. She dropped to her knees, retching. God, what is this? Corbin, trailing behind, made it 10 steps before collapsing. Elira didn't move. She saw Europa again. The boy she left. His hand reaching as the evac shuttle sealed. Her own face reflected in a helmet visor. A flash of orders typed on a pad. Cold language. Efficient language. The language of people who had never touched consequence. Then the mirror showed her standing where she was now. Same pose. Same weapon. But burned. Not flesh. Not blood. Burned through repetition. As if she'd done this before. As if she was supposed to. The mirror rippled. The Sentinel stepped forward. This time, it knelt. The ship, the thing above them, descended slowly, silently. It didn't fall. It didn't fly. It existed closer. The air thickened. Sound warped. Time twitched. The beacon stuttered for the first time since it was activated. Light shimmered in places it shouldn't, between footsteps, across shadows, in the space between breaths. The sky cracked, not with sound, but with pressure. A folding, not a breaking. The ship didn't touch down. It became real. A hole in consensus. A doorway opened through memory and anchored by will. And then everything went still. The tower stopped pulsing. The Sentinel bowed its head. And from within the opening above the mirrors, something moved. Not a form. Not a presence. An idea. A presence made of resonance and recollection. It didn't speak with voice. But Elira heard it. A voice, not hers. Not human. Not command. Not threat. One of you must choose. Then a pause that bent the air like heat over metal. We remember who listens. Elira stood silent as the meaning unraveled in her bones. The mirrors pulsed again. They no longer showed memory, they showed divergence. Possibilities. What could be? What would have been? One where the colony had fallen silent. One where the beacon had never fired. One where Elira had stood down, walked away. In none of them did anyone survive. And then one, just one, where something new emerged. Where humanity didn't fight for silence or control. Where it spoke and was heard. She turned slowly. To Corbin, pale but upright, holding the rail of the trench. To Neru, wiping her mouth, eyes locked on the sky. Her voice was quiet, reverent. You're not just answering them, you're answering all of us. To the civilians, Karen, Maldo, Visker, standing just beyond the fallback dome, watching as the air rippled with the god's breath. To Kessa, clutching a worn piece of charcoal, her other hand in Neris. What do we do? Neru asked. Elira turned back to the mirror field. The reflection now showed only herself staring back. Unflinching, unyielding. She stepped forward. Into the field. The air hummed. The sky dimmed. Even the wind paused, as though the world was holding its breath. And from within the resonance, the voice whispered. Then let it begin. Elira looked over her shoulder one last time. Fall back to Shelter 3. Nera blinked. Elira, what are you? Whatever comes through first, she said, and stepped into the fold, into the moment before the next world. There was no sensation of falling, no pain, no acceleration, no transition. Elira stepped forward, and the world blinked. She was no longer on Erebus. No sky, no ground, just light, not blinding, but infinite. It shimmered like memory caught in amber, refracting timelines and untaken paths. It wasn't a void. It was density, compressed meaning, a place where cause and effect layered upon themselves like the folds of old scripture. Around her, echoes of herself flickered, wearing different uniforms, speaking to faces she didn't know, screaming in silence, laughing in rooms that never existed. In one version, she was still a soldier on Europa. In another, she never joined the military at all. In another, she died on Dion, never knowing the name Erebus. Each version stared back at her. And then they vanished, stripped away. And she was alone. Or so she thought. A shape unfolded in front of her, not approaching, not appearing, but becoming. It resembled no biology she knew, no machine, no metaphor. A living principle, coded in rhythm, gravity, and consequence. It was both there and not, formed from the harmonics between conviction and memory. When it spoke, it didn't speak. It resonated. You stood when others knelt. You remembered when silence was easier. Why? Elira didn't think. She didn't process. She felt. Because someone had to. Because the truth deserves a witness. Because Earth forgot that being human meant more than following orders. Because I couldn't bury it again. The presence pulsed. Not approval. Not disapproval. Not emotion as humans understood it. But acknowledgement. You are a vector. We do not grant power. We offer continuance. You may anchor a path, but cannot control it. Do you accept this burden? The space around her flickered, and the light began to divide. Two visions coalesced before her. Not images. Experiences. In the first, she stood alone at the edge of the colony ruins. The beacon was silent. The black ships above. Earth's silence absolute. The towers were gone. The sentinel reduced to ash. And she, hollow-eyed, carrying a truth that would die with her. The colony was declared lost in a magnetic storm. No records. No outcry. Humanity marched forward, narrower than ever. In the second, the beacon fired again. Stronger. Wider. This time not just to the drift relays, but beyond. Hijacked D-space antennas. Forgotten satellites. Data caches smuggled through sympathetic traders. And from the far colonies, places even Earth barely monitored, answers. Not all in kind. Some were just fragments. One was a poem. One was a song. One was just a child's voice saying, "We hear you." And then came the third vision. Not offered by the presence. Not sent. Projected by Elira herself. She stood not alone, but surrounded. Other captains. Other soldiers. Survivors. Mutineers. Not rebelling for power, but for purpose. To reclaim the right to speak truth. Some burned. Some fell. But some survived. Enough to matter. The presence responded. This is the divergence. Both paths end in fire. But only one leads to voice. The light dimmed. The echoes faded. And Elira was left with only her breath. The weight of choice. A shape formed in her hand. Not material, but directive. A pattern of action encoded in memory. the authority to continue the signal or to seal it forever. She could end this. No more risk. No retaliation. Just peace. Numb, hollow peace. Earth would win, but so would silence. Or she could fire it again, through every backdoor she could find. Broadcast across centuries if she had to. A war not of weapons, but of remembrance. She remembered Dion. The empty comms. The sealed logs. The last whisper of a man who said, "We shouldn't have opened it." And she remembered Kessa's hand in Neris. "I choose the noise," Elira said. The presence did not nod. It did not move. But the fold shivered, as if the universe took a breath. Then so be it. Elira fell. Not down. Not backward. But inward. The light collapsed around her like folding paper. Sensations rushed past: fire, dust, screams, breath. The hum of the beacon. The pulse of towers. The whisper of every silenced voice across every broken world. And then, gravity. Erebus. Elira hit the ground in a crouch. Knees bent. Shotgun raised. The world was not the same. Above, the sky was no longer red. It had turned black, streaked with veins of luminous white, not stars, but connections. Threads. The ship still hovered. But now its light reached down. Not as a weapon. As a bridge. The mirrors were gone. In their place stood figures. Vague. Glowing. Some barely humanoid. Others vast. But none stepped forward. They simply watched. Corbin's voice came through her calm. "Elira, are you back?" She stood. "I never left. What do we do now?" She looked at the sky. At the bridge of light. "Now." She turned toward the beacon. "Now we make sure they hear it." She walked toward the terminal. And pressed send. The signal burst through Erebus's crust, hijacked every relay, bounced off every ancient satellite, fed itself into the fabric of the old net like a virus written in memory and conviction. In the fallback shelter, Kessa looked up. Visker clasped her husband's badge and whispered something no one heard. Nera stared at the screen without blinking. For the first time, none of them asked what came next. Far above, one of the black ships shifted. Not to attack. To receive. And in the stillness that followed, across the torn horizon, lights began to flicker. From other towers. Other worlds. Other people. The voice that had been silenced was no longer alone. It had become a chorus. And in that chorus, faint but clear, came the first echo. A voice not from Erebus. Not from Earth. A woman's voice, cracked and bright. "We heard you." The voice echoed longer than it should have. Not through air. Not through sound. But through the lattice of memory that had begun to anchor itself across the stars. Elira stood by the terminal, still, her hand resting on the pad that had sent the signal. Around her, Erebus breathed. The figures in the distance, those glowing silhouettes, alien and impossible, did not approach. But they remained. Watching. Waiting. Not as observers, but as participants in something ancient being reawakened. The ground itself vibrated with a new hum. Not the rumble of machinery or seismic stress, but a resonance. The kind that made bone ache and teeth hum. It came not from within the planet, but from the space around it, as if reality itself had joined the chorus. Above, the sky now bled white lines, veins of distant signals cascading through the void like threads spun between worlds. Stars that hadn't moved in eons began to shift, no longer merely dots of light, but endpoints. Destinations. Corbin emerged from the fallback dome, one arm still in a sling, eyes wide with disbelief. "We got a reply," he said. It wasn't a question. Elira nodded slowly, as if to confirm for herself. Behind him, Nera helped the others up the ridge. Kessa clutched her hand, staring upward with wide eyes that reflected constellations never charted. Visker wept openly, the sound raw and full of something that wasn't grief. Something older. Like release. She reached up, kissed her husband's old military badge, and whispered a name. A second voice followed. This one male. Older. Rougher. War-worn. Broadcast confirmed. Erebus, 9, we hear you. You're not alone. Static bled through the comm lines. Then another voice. Then another. A child singing. A whisper of old prayers. A chant in a language no human had spoken in centuries. A soldier humming a war anthem. A scientist reciting coordinates through ragged breaths. A diplomat pleading. A voice, maybe synthetic, asking if it was too late to change. And then, the flood began. Messages in all formats. Some voices. Some symbols. Some whole data packages wrapped in encryption so old it predated Earth's unified calendar. Many were incomplete. Fragmented. But they carried the same undertone. We heard you. Some came from places the galactic cartographers had labeled as dark zones, colonies presumed lost, fallen silent generations ago. Some were from vessels that hadn't been logged in any Earth registry. One was from what had once been a penal colony on the fringes of the Vega debris belt, where the last message received had been a plea to die with dignity. Now it sent back a song. And somewhere, perhaps on ships hiding between systems, or bunkers buried beneath scorched moons, others heard the chorus and realized the silence had ended. Nara tapped her pad, eyes glassy. Elira, the beacon's getting pings from over a dozen systems. I think they've been waiting for someone to start it. A low chime echoed through the open skies, soft, but omnidirectional. It didn't originate from Erebus. It was a signal acknowledgement. Not Earth. Not any known protocol. Something else. Something older. Elira turned back toward the Sentinel. It was no longer alone. The others had emerged. Towers rising from dust. Light blooming through cracks. Ships that folded into place not with engines, but invitation. Not a fleet. Not an army. A witnessing. Each form stood motionless, some towering like broken architecture given breath, others fluid, like thoughts made visible. They pulsed in unison with the signal, a call not of command, but confirmation. The universe wasn't responding with dominance. It was listening. Corbin laughed. It was too loud, too shocked, and too real. What the hell do we do with this? No one answered at first. Elira didn't smile. She should have, but the weight hadn't lifted. Because contact was never the end. It was always the beginning. We tell them the truth, she said. All of it. She looked to the others. Survivors now marked by something more than survival. Kessa stood next to Neru, still holding the charcoal that had sketched the towers before any of them had seen them. She looked up at Elira and whispered, "They're listening now." Behind them, others emerged, injured, scarred, wide-eyed. A small crowd. A remnant. A beginning. "We have the signal chain," Nera said. "The spread's exponential now. Some of the old orbital assets, Earth never shut them down. They just forgot. Or they were meant to be forgotten," Corbin muttered. They stood together now, under a sky that wasn't theirs alone anymore. And it felt like standing on the lip of a cliff, the whole galaxy unfolding before them, waiting. Elira turned back to the terminal. Typed a simple header. She didn't encrypt it. She didn't mark it classified. She didn't sanitize anything. She told them everything. What happened at Erebus. What Earth did. What they chose instead. How the choice wasn't war. It was voice. She told them the truth. And then she asked the same question that had been asked of her. What question? Nero asked softly. Elira looked over the torn horizon, now lit by the glow of remembered voices. Why did we stay silent so long? The response wasn't instant. But it came. A ping from beyond the Cassinian rim. A colony blacklisted after its uprising. Thought annihilated. Then something else. Brief, barely decipherable. A flicker of Earth command code. Scrambled. Unauthorized. Then silence. And so it began. Across the void, human voices, raw, fractured, defiant, poured into the open. Some asked questions. Some offered stories. Some raged. Some wept. But all answered. And on Erebus 9, in the silence after the last signal was sent, Elira watched the sky ripple. Not with war, but with return. Because when the signal reaches back, it changes everything. The Earth fleet arrived 6 days late. 6 days after the signal went galaxy-wide. 6 days after the first replies. After the towers awakened. After the universe answered back. They came in force. 8 warships. 2 black ships. No insignia. No diplomatic channel. They didn't even try to hail the surface. Their ships bore the matte black plating of denial protocol enforcement craft, vessels optimized not for combat, but for obliteration. Clean architecture. Radiative suppression fields. No windows. Just hull and purpose. And that purpose had always been silence. The Erebus survivors watched from the upper ridgelines, silent, calm. Corbin had set up passive sensor relays to monitor the orbital movement. They logged the ship's orbits, weapons charge cycles, probe deployments. No attempt at dialogue. No recognition of what had happened. Because Earth wasn't the only one watching anymore. Above the planet, layered between orbit and vacuum, they waited. The witnesses. Not ships. Not machines. Concepts rendered into geometry. Lights that folded when you blinked. Towers that pulsed with old memory. Not threatening. Not passive. Present. And unignorable. The surface of Erebus had changed. Not structurally, not yet, but in tone, in weight. The planet no longer felt like a colony. It felt like a crossroads. Pilgrims came, not in floods, but in steady streams. They arrived in rusted transports and patched courier ships. They docked on improvised landing pads or simply dropped anchor on barren ridgelines. Each of them carried stories, some older than recorded time, others raw with recent betrayal. Some had been children when their colonies went dark. Some had escaped Earth's conscription nets. Some were quiet, sunken-eyed, with the hollow voices of those who'd forgotten how to speak freely. But they came, because of the signal, because someone had answered, and because this time, the answer hadn't been fire. Elira stood atop the ruined central spire, what remained of the command tower, looking through a cracked visor at a sky rewritten by defiance. Below her, Erebus hummed with quiet energy. New camps had formed around the old domes, built not for defense, but for gathering. Tents made from fusion tarp and ancient earth banners stood side by side. Fires burned not from necessity, but from ritual. Nera stood beside her, armor repaired in patches, face streaked with soot and quiet conviction. Kessa sat behind them, sketching again, this time drawing not towers or stars, but faces, some human, some not. One looked like the Sentinel. Another bore resemblance to Elira herself, eyes ringed in stars. She drew him, Nera whispered, pointing to one of the figures. That one landed 2 hours ago. Elira said nothing, but a chill traced down her spine. Corbin had transformed a former relay tower into a kind of archive. Not a vault. A display. He recorded everything. Transmissions, arrivals, messages from beyond charted space. The logs were already thousands of entries deep. History was happening. Again. You think they'll try something? Nera asked, her voice flat. They won't get the chance, Elira said. Nera raised a brow. They're not alone anymore, Elira added. And neither are we. The first warship moved. Its weapon arrays lit. And then, just for a moment, it disappeared. A blink. A silence. When it reappeared, the arrays were cold. Inactive. The ship powered down, drifting like a discarded threat. No heat. No intent. Something had spoken. Not in words. In certainty. No retaliation followed. Because retaliation wasn't the point. Presence was. Earth sent power. The galaxy sent memory. And memory remembers who listens. From a buried relay on Erebus's dark side, a scrambled signal was caught in Corbin's buffer. The message terminated mid-sequence. Then the Earth fleet turned. No message. No apology. Just departure. The black ships broke orbit first, silently, as they had come. Then the rest followed, engines cold until their burnout vectors flared with surrender. They left no satellites. No warnings. Just absence. In their absence, Erebus bloomed. Not with flora or cities, but with visits. Pilots came in ancient ships bearing banners from lost settlements. Traders offloaded relics they thought were myths. Philosophers arrived from stations built into asteroids, seeking to stand on the same ground where silence was broken. One visitor arrived barefoot, carrying nothing but a broken rifle and a nameplate that once belonged to a ship called Indivisible. No one turned him away. There were no customs, no border checks, no registry, only stories, and a place to remember them. Elira never asked to lead, but they looked to her anyway, not as a commander, as a witness, a signal. She recorded names. She listened. She responded when needed and vanished when not. Kessa called her the Keeper. Elira watched the fires one night, eyes stinging with smoke and sleeplessness. Not from exhaustion, from awe, from the unbearable weight of knowing that, for once, humanity hadn't been erased. It had persisted. She knew then, this wasn't just about survival. It was about permission. To remember. To speak. To become more than what Earth had designed them to be. Not tools. Not colonists. Not silence. But signal. And so, the final message she sent from Erebus, 9 was short. Clean. Delivered on every channel, on every frequency, in every language they had managed to recover. And somewhere, in the heart of the stars, the chorus answered. Humanity had been tested not by extinction, but by the temptation to erase itself. But what remained? What chose to remain? Was signal. And what comes next? Is ours.